Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. On behalf of our library director, Bill Harris, I want to welcome you all here to the Henry A. Wallace Visitor and Education Center. I'm Jeff Urban, the education director here, and this is going to be another one of those wonderful programs put on by our own Cliff Laube. I know you guys have been here for many of his programs. He does a fantastic job, so you're in for a treat again tonight. We are here to learn about baseball. From a wonderful book. And I just finished another book about baseball. It was actually about a guy who would end every one of his sentences with a baseball reference, which was kind of weird. And it just came out. The book just came out. It was supposed to come out last year, but it was on, there was a strike. And is it just me or is the mood in here getting foul? There we go. Now we're talking. So he's going to do another book, I guess, based upon the first one. But we actually have a real live author here, Kevin Baker. How many of you are here thinking it was going to be Kevin Bacon? Anybody? No, okay. Kevin Baker is a novelist, a historian, and journalist. He has been a professional writer since the age of 13. Working originally for the Gloucester Daily Times and as a stringer covering schoolboy sports. He's co-author of Reggie Jackson's Becoming Mr. October, and his work has appeared in Harper's, where he is a contributing editor, the New York Observer, the New York Times, and the New Republic. He lives in New York City. Kevin is a friend of the Roosevelt Presidential Library through his work with the New York City chapter of the Living New Deal. So it's my honor to introduce Mr. Baker.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks, Cliff, for having me up here. Always great to get up here. Thanks to everyone on the staff who has stayed late and put this on. It's a wonderful part of the world, and thanks for coming out too on this night. I was afraid I might have been hoisted on my own petard here because this is such a crucial day for local ball teams. You know, the Yankees can win the division today with the win. I'm sorry? Yeah, with the win over Baltimore. They can win the division. And of course, the Mets have a crucial game down in Atlanta where I think they're going to reverse many years of frustration. I hope so. Love to see a Subway Series. Let's go Mets. All right. So I'll do my Chuck Schumer here. Yeah, I can hope this works here. It was always a city game, baseball. For all the efforts to slap a pastoral gloss on the sport, for all the attempts to make it about little boys playing in a cow pasture, only someone unfamiliar with the isolation of American farm life could truly believe that baseball came of age in the country. One of the countless names of the game gives it away. It was called town ball because it was played on those days when everybody came into town for church or market, town being the only place where enough men or boys or women or girls could be assembled for a full nine. What we know as baseball today is really an urban game. More precisely, it is the New York game. That's what modern baseball was first called and where it was first played. New York is where its rules were perfected and where we first kept score. New York was where the curveball was devised and the bunt and the stolen base, and where the home run came into its own. New York was where admission was first charged to see a game and where the very first All-Star game was played and the first World Championship between Brooklyn and Manhattan, of course. It was in New York, too, where the game's color line was, that's for the home run there. It was in New York, too, where the game's color line was finally broken and the reserve clause was made law, and where a players' league was first conceived and died, and where the first modern free agent was signed. It was here that the sports, or any sports, first true superstar emerged, and where the first true baseball stadiums were built. New York was where sports writing reached its zenith, where the first great radio broadcasters plied their trade, and where the first game was televised. It was in New York that the only perfect game in World Series history was pitched, where an expansion team won a World Series for the first time. Let's go Mets. Where 15 World Series were played exclusively within what are the modern city limits, and where the World Series was fixed by gamblers, right up at the Ansonia. New York was where the Yankee Clipper came to play, and the Say Hey Kid, and where the chairman of the board already resided. He actually had the nickname before Sinatra. Baseball is a game that grew up inextricably linked to the pace and the customs and the demands of New York. It was shaped by the challenges and the possibilities the city had to offer, by its inventiveness and its ambitions, its grandiosity and its corruption. For the last 2 centuries, the game's trajectory has followed the city's many rises and declines, its booms and its busts, its follies and its tragedies. The history of baseball, that is to say, the received history, is alive from beginning to end, from its creation myth to its rosy models of commerce, community, and fair play. John Thorne tells us in Baseball in the Garden of Eden, the lie begins with where and how it was founded. It is not my intention here to enter the eternal debate over exactly when and where the very first contest involving a bat and ball took place. Claimants range from Prague to Pittsfield, Mass., and just about every burg in between. As David Block makes clear in Baseball Before We Knew It, mankind was probably playing some sort of bat and ball game from the moment we climbed down from the trees and onto the savannah, which no doubt made a great playing field once someone groomed the high grass. Ancient murals depict Egyptians with bats playing at something called Sekher Hamat around 2500 BC. Berbers in the 1930s were observed playing Takert El Mahag, or the Ball of the Pilgrim's Mother, a game one historian theorized was brought to North Africa in the 5th century AD by the Vandals. Medieval Normans played Grand Tech, while their French cousins played La Balle Empoisonnée. The Germans had Schlagball, and the Finns played Pes Apollo. Don't ask. Countless other bat and ball games evolved under any number of different rules and different names in England. There was hand in and hand out, and wicket and cricket and rounders. There was prisoner's base, or just base. There was tip cat and one old cat. There was feeder and squares and northern spell. There was stool ball and stob ball, or stow ball, and trap ball and tut ball. And there was goal ball, barn ball, sting ball, soak ball, stick ball, and burn ball, and round ball, and town ball, and finally, baseball. The whole welter of English and continental games followed the colonists over to America. Hired Polish laborers were playing long ball in the Jamestown settlement by 1609. On Christmas Day, 1621, Governor William Bradford of Plymouth Colony was enraged to find some of his fellow pilgrims frolicking in ye street at play openly, some at pitching ye bar, some at stool ball, and such like sport. At Valley Forge, George Washington was recorded as having taken part in a game of wicket. Here he is trying to block the plate with his horse, which was legal then. While Lewis and Clark tried to teach a form of bass to the Nez Perce, and small boys wrote later of watching a grown Abe Lincoln join in their games of town ball. How long were his strides, and how his coattails stuck out behind him, and how we tried to hit him with the ball as he ran the bases. He entered into the spirit of play as completely as any of us, and we invariably hailed his coming with delight. That's a cartoon, incidentally, with before the 1860 election, which was almost as fraught as this year's election, and included 4 candidates. Doubleday, the one thing that is clear is that Abner Doubleday had nothing to do with it. This was widely acknowledged even at the time the myth was first propagated by a special baseball commission handpicked by Albert Spalding of sporting goods fame in 1905. Doubleday was sort of the Forrest Gump of the 19th century, a soldier, mystic, and bibliophile with an uncanny ability for being on hand when anything of interest was going on. The first shot of the Civil War, a Confederate cannon blast at Fort Sumter, penetrated the masonry and burst very near my head, he later recalled. And in turn, he aimed the first gun on our side in reply to the attack. He would rise to the rank of Major General, sustain 2 serious wounds, hold the Union line on the first day of Gettysburg, and take the train with President Lincoln back to the battlefield a few months later when the president gave his Gettysburg address. Doubleday read Sanskrit, corresponded with Ralph Waldo Emerson, commanded an all-black regiment of troops, attended seances at the White House with Mary Todd Lincoln. This is, I'm told, not an actual photograph from one of the seances, but a recreation. Doubleday obtained the first charter for San Francisco's cable cars and served as president of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society. But he did not invent baseball. Nobody really thought he did, even on Spalding's commission. The commission's chairman, A.G. Mills, had been friends with Doubleday for 20 years, including a period when Mills was president of the National League. A fellow Civil War officer, Mills had arranged Doubleday's funeral and his burial at Arlington Cemetery. Yet for as long and as well as he knew him, Mills admitted he never heard his friend so much as mention baseball. In a brief autobiographical sketch, Doubleday himself wrote that, "In my outdoor sports, I was addicted to," wait for it, topographical work. Apparently, Doubleday's anointing as the inventor of baseball had much more to do with the fact that Spalding and his wife were also theosophists. If true, it's hilarious. It's as if Dr. Naismith were replaced as the inventor of basketball by a group of Scientologists who claimed it was actually L. Ron Hubbard. Confronted by reporters years later, Mills fumbled that at least his commission had picked the perfect small town, once again saving baseball from the clutches of the big, dirty, corrupting, multi-ethnic city, at least in our national imagination. I submit to you, gentlemen, that if our search had been for a typical American village, a village that could best stand as a counterpart of all villages where baseball might have been originated and developed, Cooperstown would best fit the bill. And so it would, though it is no nicer a village or a small town than Hyde Park or any of the wonderful villages and towns here throughout the Hudson Valley. Though with all the great stars, and the makers and shakers of the game that it honors, not even the charming Baseball Hall of Fame that would arise in charming Cooperstown has ever had the temerity to admit Abner Doubleday. By the 1850s, an alternative foundation myth was set up in Doubleday's place. That is how the game was invented by the New York Knickerbockers Baseball Club. One fine day in 1846, they took the steam ferry over to the Elysian Fields in Hoboken to play the mysterious New York Baseball Club in the very first game of real baseball and lost 23-1. I first read that when I was 8 years old, and I didn't believe it then. The giveaway is that thumping defeat. If the Knickerbockers invented the damn game, how do they manage to lose the first one so badly? The truth, of course, is that they weren't the first. The Knickerbockers, as John Thorne puts it, were consolidators rather than innovators, combining and formalizing rules that others were already playing by. Here they are in an early daguerreotype, looking like a bunch of Mennonites out on the toot. The dude with the full beard and the stogie at the lower left is one Daniel Lucius Doc Adams, who is as much right as anyone to be called the father of baseball. He is also not in Cooperstown, even though he was a thoroughly admirable character, a fervent abolitionist, a graduate of Yale and Harvard, a medical doctor who spent much time treating the poor for free at the New York dispensaries, and someone who considered his marriage, quote, the crowning achievement of my life. He was also the first shortstop and had the first hardball made after he became exhausted running out to left field to relay throws with the original rubber ball of the sport. It was Doc Adams, as the recording secretary of the Knickerbockers, who went on writing everything down as they and the other teams all over New York and Brooklyn and New Jersey kept revising and improving the rules of the New York game in the years after the Civil War. Just how that game evolved and flourished in the city is the gist of the fine book available for sale here tonight at a very low price. But first, I did want to say a few words about where we are here and with this honors. Hyde Park is not only a wonderful learning center, but also my favorite presidential library and museum. And trust me, I've been to a few. You can really see how someone growing up here would feel they could be president 4 times, and deservedly so. And also, of course, the home of the woman who became the first lady of the world, who lived here, at least in the area for many a year. This is Franklin and Eleanor at opening day in Washington in 1917, when he was serving as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and a busy President Wilson dispatched FDR to throw out the first ball, Wilson having declared war on Germany just 2 weeks earlier. Eleanor is sporting a hat you do not want to sit behind at a game. Let's see if we know. Yeah, here we go. Yep, quite a hat. If they seem to have rather queasy expressions on their faces, you must keep in mind that they are watching the senators. Roosevelt would, in the end, throw out the first ball on opening day, a record 9 times in all. And then there was the 1937 All-Star game. There we go. Yeah, in Washington's Griffith Stadium. FDR, by his own admission, was these are some more of the first balls here. FDR, by his own admission, was not a good ball player as a child, and he served mostly as student manager at Groton and Harvard. He would say sort of generic politic things about baseball, such as, I'm the kind of fan who wants to get plenty of action for my money. I get the biggest kick out of the biggest score. A game in which the hitters pull the ball into the far corners of the field, the outfielders scramble, and men run the bases. This sounds no more convincing, really, than Hillary Clinton claiming she was a Cubs and a Yankees fan. But hey, remember the 2 politicians who were the most truly fervent baseball fans in our time were Richard Nixon and Rudy Giuliani. And Roosevelt does seem to have liked the game. Early on in his career, he was known to sneak away from his Wall Street law office to catch the Giants up at the Polo Grounds, and he was on hand for a couple of very memorable games in New York baseball history. One was Babe Ruth's famous called shot in the 1932 World Series at Wrigley Field, which he saw while first campaigning for president. Some of you may have noticed that the jersey Ruth was wearing in that game recently sold at auction for over $24 million. So don't throw anything away. That's my motto. Another was game 2 of the 1936 World Series in the Polo Grounds, when the Yankees set a record that still stands for most runs in a series game, beating the New York baseball Giants 18-4. The Yankees fans were very upset. They really wanted to get to 20, but the surprising thing is that FDR stayed for the entire game. In the bottom of the ninth, Hank Lieber of the Giants hit a 475-foot shot to deep center field. And Joe DiMaggio made a running over-the-shoulder catch to end the game. It might have been considered one of the greatest World Series catches of all time, save for the fact that the score was, 18-4. DiMaggio caught it for the last out of the game. You can see there you go up there. And he ran up the staircase to the locker rooms in center field. Yet another oddity of the wonderfully weird Polo Grounds is that the clubhouses were in deep center field, and there were staircases leading up to them. You can see the players came up and down. So that's one of the things that made Willie Mays' catch in 1954 so tremendous. That center field just went on forever. And that fact that he even got to the ball was incredible. The Polo Grounds were out in deep center, and DiMaggio stopped there when he got up to them because he remembered that it had just been announced that everyone was to remain in their seats while President Roosevelt exited the ballpark through center field in his car. As Richard Ben Kramer wrote, Joe, without thinking, stiffened to attention as the presidential car approached. As he did, FDR grinned up at him, lifted a hand in a jaunty wave from the brim of his hat. When the U.S. went into World War II, Roosevelt issued his famous green light letter, which he called baseball a definite recreational asset that would be totally worthwhile to keep going during World War II, and even encouraged the majors to play more night games so the day shift would get to see them too. Little known fact, Eleanor Roosevelt played her part in this too. Besides her constant trips all over the country and the theaters of war, she also made the time to manage the Rockford Peaches in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Here she can be seen repositioning the outfielders for the Peaches. I kid. During his 1944 campaign, the closest of all his elections, and it wasn't all that close, Roosevelt set out to prove that he was still well enough to be president by making an epic open car tour of 4 New York boroughs. The tour covered over 50 miles and took more than 4 hours, most of it in what William Manchester called a hard, steady, drenching, cold autumn rain, which saturated clothes and inflicted misery on everyone not sheltered. A little like today. Nonetheless, FDR refused to curtail the tour or even put up the roof of his Packard, often waving bareheaded to the 3 million New Yorkers lining his route, and then wound up the evening with an address to the post-war world at the Waldorf Astoria before the Foreign Policy Association. One of his first stops was before an ebullient crowd at Ebbets Field, where he made the confession that I have never been to Ebbets Field before, but got a huge cheer when he added, maybe Hillary-like, I have rooted for the Dodgers, and I hope to come back here someday and see them play. Well, President Roosevelt never did get to come back to see the Dodgers play in Brooklyn. By the next April 12th, just 3 months into his 4th term, he was dead. But he had lived long enough to guide America into the post-war world, where Eleanor Roosevelt became our first official delegate to the United Nations and played a key role in writing the very first Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So these are the things, if you have not been here already, you should definitely get here again or stick around and see. So, all right. Well, thanks very much. Thanks for coming out. I thought Any questions, comments, criticisms? Well, no criticisms, but any questions or comments? Be happy to answer them and then to sign books. Yeah, sir.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, very much enjoyed the book.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question about one of the things that struck me in it was the openness and prevalence of gambling in and around baseball before the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, too, in the context of today. Gambling played a huge role in the development of baseball and the professionalization of it. Americans then, as now, liked to bet on everything. And baseball was really well designed for betting. It was something where there's a discrete play for every batter. You can bet on all kinds of stuff. For a long time, local shops that I remember in New York sold like the charts with the runs for the week. You could bet on that. That lasted forever. So betting was huge, and it got totally out of hand. Also because the owners were really keeping the salaries of the players low, and you had the World Series thrown in 1919. And this really could have destroyed the sport right there. They were lucky. Baseball clamped down on it. They hired the first commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. But they also were lucky that Babe Ruth, the most transformational athlete in history, I think, comes to New York in 1920. And that's really the man and the place and the time were met. And that helped take everybody's mind off that. It's interesting now that baseball and all professional sports have gone full out and embraced gambling for added revenues in America now. And the guy, MLB, is really counting on being the transcendent hero who will bring fans back to the game is Shohei Ohtani, who they compare constantly to Ruth and who they want to be kind of another Babe Ruth figure. And certainly a great, great player, as we saw the other day. I worry very much about that we have not heard the last of that potential scandal involving him. I find it hard to believe that anybody puts their translator in charge of a $16 million bank account. But odder things have happened with celebrities. But it really is something I think baseball and the rest of the big sports have to look out for. It's easier than ever to bet and not be caught at it. I think they think that because players make so much money, they won't bet. But betting's a compulsion. You know, we know this. It's something you do irrationally. And there are a lot of people involved with the sport who don't make a lot of money. And you could easily see something involving umpires or anything else that would lead to betting scandals. So I think it's letting the devil back in the room, and I think it's a mistake. So, other questions? Yeah. Over there. Sorry, Cliff, we really have you running.
When's the second book coming out?
Second book is going to be out in the spring of 2026. It is written. It needs to be edited, preferably with a chainsaw or something else. But updated, of course, to the present. Hoping for a Subway series this year that will help sell it. This book goes through 1945, and the second one starts with the signing of Jackie Robinson, who will also be on the cover, and that really kind of separates. It was a great place to kind of naturally separate baseball when finally the color line goes down, Jim Crow baseball ends, and baseball becomes a sport that everyone's allowed to play at the highest level. So spring of 2026, look for it. It'll be in Mets orange on the cover.
I have a question regarding the home run and pointed to by
Yes,
Babe Ruth.
yes.
I'm not aware there's been lore throughout history that he did point and then did make the home run afterwards, or does that pitcher settle that?
Charlie Root, who was the pitcher, always claimed that he didn't. And Charlie Root refused to be in the Babe Ruth story, not because of the terrible screenplay, but because of the fact that he was shown as hitting a called shot off him. precisely where Ruth is pointing, I find kind of unimportant. Who else in the history of the World Series has ever pointed at either the pitcher or the stands or whatever and said, I'm going to get, I think he's quite clearly indicating he's going to hit a big shot off this guy. So it's the film settles it for me.
Question about Babe Ruth and the centerpiece of New York, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig.
Yeah.
And I think there seems to be some controversy about the relationship.
And that's one of the things I go into in the book. They were friends at first, Gehrig and Ruth, very opposite people. Gehrig was very quiet, introverted, almost odd in ways. And Ruth, of course, was the world's biggest extrovert. He seemed larger than life. When Don Mattingly first came into the Yankees clubhouse, the clubhouse manager said, I think it was still Pete Sheehy or somebody said, hey, I'll show you. This is Babe Ruth's locker here. And Mattingly said, Babe Ruth was real. And, he's admitted it. But, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you think this guy with all the stories about him wasn't just a made up character? So he and Gehrig are great friends at first. And Ruth would go over to Gehrig's home and he pickled eels, which he loved. It's a German thing. I don't know. But, but then something happened and it's unclear what. And it seems to have been some kind of incident when they were all on a postseason trip to Japan. And Gehrig was looking all over for his wife, couldn't find her, and finally found her in Ruth's stateroom. And there's all kinds of speculation about what with Ruth and Mrs. Ruth. So all kind of speculation about what was going on. But Gehrig was just enraged by it, never really forgave Ruth. The day they give for him in 1939 for Gehrig, the famous luckiest man in the face of the earth speech, Ruth is so overcome. He's crying. He throws his arm around Gehrig. Gehrig, you look at it, he's kind of smiling a little, but he still, and according to the teammates, did not forgive him. So it's unclear what would have been going on. Possibly just if his wife was just getting drunk, that would have offended Gehrig. It's funny, the wife was really what we would call a baseball Annie today. She may have been, probably was the first person he ever slept with. And he was very kind of, protective there. But it, something happened there that really kind of split them apart. It's sort of a shame.
Why did the National League drop to 8 teams in, I think, 1899?
Well, in part, the National League dropped at 8 teams because they had won the battle. There was like this 3-league fight when the players walked out and formed the Players League. And so you had the American Association, not the later minor league, the National League, and the Players League, 3 major league teams. New York had like 7 major league teams for one season. The American Association is fatally wounded by this. They go out of business a couple of years later. The Players League folds. Their backers go into the National League. So you had 12 teams. The National League then decided to hit upon the great idea of people can own more than one team. What could possibly go wrong? And a lot went wrong. Among other things, the guy who owned the Cleveland Spiders, I think Frank Robeson, also owned the St. Louis Cardinals. So he took all his best players and put them in St. Louis. And the Spiders went 20-134. So that was sort of disastrous. A lot of this was disaster. So they finally just decided to just kind of cut off some of these teams. Some historians have speculated that it's maybe because they were in cities that had growing black populations. I don't think that is consistently the case, though. It was just more like we can't manage 12 teams. You can't have teams finishing 12, so they got rid of them. But that kind of gave the opening to the American League to then come in and form its own, form the junior circuit, as sports writers used to call it.
You say the Spiders went 20 and 134.
Yes.
Which adds up to 154. How did they come up? We still play 154 games, right?
We play 162 games.
Oh, I do.
Plus endless playoffs.
Right.
But yeah,
So how did they come up with that number?
I don't, good question. I don't know why that precisely. I mean, it's 22 games against every other team. It's 11. It must have been really hell to schedule it back when you had 11 teams. You had 16 teams altogether in the majors in 11 cities. So the transportation wasn't too bad usually, but to schedule this must have been quite difficult, and scheduled 11 games at home, 11 games away. But that's how they had it for year after year. And, some teams, like when the Yankees had Ruth, they really didn't have off days. They would go and play anywhere they could, where they could get some money, small town, whatever. And Ruth was often expected to pitch the whole game, or dodge 100 kids out in the outfield and march with the local band and sign autographs for everybody and pose in a funny hat. And he got a share of the gate for all these games. He made a lot of money, much more money than any athlete ever made at that point. But it was amazing. The Yankees just would not have an off day. You'd go off and play somewhere else for the for some extra bucks. And that was baseball then. Yeah.
If you could have been,
Yeah, I can hear you.
if you could have been president, any of the games that you wrote about in this book, which one?
Well, I think the called shot game would have been great fun. The Merkel game, which what really went on in there, that sounds like such a crazy moment where this umpire decided to move away from the way things have been called at the end of the game for years and declare the Cubs the winners in this game. But a crazy game, and led to like the principal players on both teams trying to get hold of the ball and throw it away or use it to tag second base. I have a whole description on it. It looks, I say it looks kind of like the crowd scene in the Battleship Potemkin, which was also set around the same time. That must have been something. But there were also like fantastic World Series, often involving New York teams in this era. The 24 World Series, nobody remembers it. Great World Series between the Senators and the Giants. The only series the old Senators ever won. 7 games here. 1912, crazy World Series with the Red Sox and the Giants. These would have all been fantastic games to be at. Or the 1870 game when the Brooklyn Atlantics shattered the original Cincinnati Red Stockings 130-game unbeaten streak in the Capitoline grounds in Brooklyn. Also crazy stuff. A key play included a Brooklyn fan jumping on the back of the left fielder for Cincinnati, for which he was arrested, but the play was allowed to stand. So, only in Brooklyn. But and at the end of it, that spoiler, but Brooklyn won, and Cincinnati lost all interest in their team, the first professional team, once they lost one game. I think even Yankees fans would be okay with the team going 130-1, but not in Cincinnati in 1870. So.
Just a question on the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah.
Shoeless Joe Jackson hit over 300.
Yeah.
And he's banned for life.
Right. He hit like 375. I think he set a record at the time for hits in the World Series. There was a ton of confusion about the Black Sox scandal, which persists to this day. And a lot of that was put there intentionally by the master gambler behind it, Arnold Rothstein, because he wanted to cover his own role, which he did quite effectively. There are a group of players who were in it. A couple of them, Buck Weaver, who I think John Cusack plays in the movie, and Joe Jackson kind of evidently repented their role in it. So they weren't throwing games, but others were. Not everybody in the team was involved. But it did happen. It was a scandal. And there have been constant rumors before this. Whenever there was a big upset, that team was throwing it. For instance, the Boston Miracle Braves beat the Philadelphia Athletics in 4 straight in 1914. And there were rumors that this had been thrown. Almost certainly not, but rumors were everywhere about this. And the White Sox decided to put themselves up for sale. And they were staying at the Ansonia, which was then a popular ball players hotel. Amazing history. The Ansonia was also many years later where Plato's Retreat was, the infamous sex club. It was also a gay bathhouse where Bette Midler made her debut singing for Barry Manilow, playing piano in a towel. So everything happened at the Ansonia. Ruth lived there for years. So, but they were staying there and they kind of put themselves up for bid. And, and Rothstein arranged it, and they threw the series. So yeah, and yes, Joe Jackson. They were all acquitted too. This went to court. Nobody was convicted for throwing the series because the records disappeared mysteriously and all this. But Joe Jackson and the other known conspirators were banned from organized baseball for life. Yeah.
Yes. New York baseball, of course, when you look at the history, the biggest, darkest day in baseball, as far as Brooklyn is concerned, with the big move to the West Coast.
Yes.
I guess my question is, was there any last minute move that you're aware of to salvage that? Number one. Number two, would the Giants have had the Dodgers preceded them to the West Coast?
Yes, and yes, in both. Well, they would have at least. The Giants actually had the idea to move first. They were run by Horace Stoneham, the Nepo baby owner of all time. This guy who was sadly unequipped to run a team, lifelong alcoholic, and he wanted to move the team to Minneapolis first, which the Giants controlled. Walter O'Malley then was ambivalent about quite going, but he was, if he couldn't get the deal he wanted in New York, which was a massive stadium built for him that would have entailed knocking down about 100 blocks of brownstone Brooklyn, he was going to move. So they really held the city up, and the city said no. And now there's a whole debate over who was most responsible. Was it Walter O'Malley or was it Robert Moses for saying no? And it's kind of like, for New York, it's kind of like, Godzilla against King Kong, two of the most hated figures. In book 2, you'll see whose side I come down on. But basically, this was unheard of. Cities did not subsidize baseball teams. They had much bigger concerns. The whole idea of shelling out tons of money to keep a team was unheard of. And unfortunately, the really wrong lesson, I think, was learned from that, where teams now, we subsidize all of these New York teams up the wazoo. I think the Yankees got something like $1.2 billion toward their last stadium. And we subsidize them as prices get higher and higher, and fewer people, regular people, are allowed in the ballpark. Yankee Stadium at its zenith held 82,000 people. Today it holds 46,000. In other words, like a whole Fenway Park's worth of fans have been excluded from this park, with all the space devoted to luxury boxes. And it's kind of obscene, but that's where it all started. And part of this too, you'll notice, like moving to Minneapolis, a lot of teams around that time were getting very antsy about how many black people lived in their cities. And Horace Stoneham, who had the Giants in East Harlem, very much wanted to get out of this black area to a nice white city like Minneapolis, and eventually San Francisco, which is tragic for so many reasons. The lesser one of which is that he was about to have all these great black and Hispanic players coming into play for the team. Juan Marichal, Orlando Cepeda, the Alou brothers, Willie McCovey, all these guys were about to be the Giants on the Giants, and he took the team away. So, and the Dodgers was similarly, heartbreaking and wrong. So, yeah. So, guys, yeah.
Is it on now?
There we go.
As a fan of baseball, can you comment on the new rules, the pitch clock, the limited throws to first, and the constraints on the defensive alignments?
Interesting question. In some ways, I realized something had to be done. I mean, the game was really slowing down. And it's funny, like when baseball starts, the 19th century, all these great American commentators, Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, talk about how fast it is and how American it was. And it really was a fast game. The 1919, there's a game between the Phillies and the Giants that takes 58 minutes. Baseball just whipped along. I realized it needed to speed up, but I think baseball would have been better off doing it organically. Teaching pitchers how to pitch to contact so they can go more than 5 innings. You have a shift, hit to the opposite field, bunt. Babe Ruth once bunted 10 times safely in a month. The shift will go away. Things like that, like understanding the game. And I think instead it's kind of overwhelmed now by statistics, by the analytics, where everybody is supposed to be swinging for the fences on every pitch. That makes the game duller. So everything's a walk or a strikeout or a home run. That's to me what's mostly wrong about baseball. It doesn't trust itself as a game. It needs to come back. It's never going to be football. You're never going to have 22 guys banging into each other. And, they'll have to give up on the long-term brain damage. But nonetheless, it can be a spectacular game. And what they need to do is get back to their roots and get back to how it's supposed to be played.
What a great place to end. How about a last round of applause for our speaker? And please come join us out in the lobby for the book signing.
Thanks so much. I'm doing a lot of soapbox ranting today, but great. Thanks for coming out, guys. Oh no, I'm fine. Thanks so much. Thank you.